Good morning. Our gospel for this fifth Sunday in Lent is taken from St. John, the 11th chapter. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. And the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you. And are you going there again? And Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them. And after saying this, he told them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring to merely sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. And Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out and met him, while Mary stayed at home. And Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. And Jesus said to her, Your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she said to him, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. When she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, The teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were there with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly to go out, and they followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. And when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And he said, Where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, See how he loved him? But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." And Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, his hand and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what he had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation." I went a little bit farther than the text is supposed to go, but I wanted to get a hold of the reaction to the sign that both his followers and others had. The most heartbreaking verse here, the most heartbreaking words, I think, in this entire text are the, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." It's not quite an accusation, but it's pretty close to an accusation. It's pretty close to saying, you should have been here, Master, if you really loved us. And that's and that seems to be what is behind it. And notice that both sisters say it independently of each other, and then it gets repeated by the mourners who are hanging around their house. So this is something that people have been saying over and over about why Jesus hasn't shown up for his friend Lazarus. The thing about Lazarus is he doesn't appear in the other Gospels. You don't get him by name anywhere. And in Luke's Gospel, you do get a parable that Jesus tells about a rich man and a poor man, and the poor man is named Lazarus. Doesn't seem to have anything in common with this Lazarus other than the name, and the fact that both of them have to do with this line that comes in at the end of the Luke story, where essentially the rich man has gone to hell, and he asks Abraham to send Lazarus, the poor man who had been at his gates, to go tell his brothers about life after death, to tell his brothers about judgment, so that they could also avoid the hell that he found himself in. And the response from Abraham is that they have Moses and the law to tell them all of that. And if they won't listen to that, they certainly won't listen to somebody who comes back from the dead. And then you come to John's Gospel and you get that concept enacted in the raising of Lazarus. I hear in the heartbreak of Martha and Mary's response, "Lord, if you had been here, our brother would not have died." I've been hearing similar things all month as we've been fighting the COVID. I've heard people claim that God sent this as a judgment on us, which I think is ridiculous. Death and illness are not God's will. And I've also heard, if if we would just turn, then God will rescue us. And even if you say, well, the buck doesn't stop with God on this one, then in terms of sending it, well, then why isn't he healing us from it? Why isn't God reaching out and doing something for us in the midst of all of this? And I think we sound just like this pained good friend who is speaking to Jesus and saying, Master, if you had been here, we would not have this virus. If you had been here, we would not have this death. And I find that an interesting response, because if you go back to the Luke text, Jesus might look at you and say, well, you've had Moses and the law to tell you all that. Let me unpack that a little bit. If you want to boil down most of the Old Testament dietary restrictions, it says don't eat weird stuff. Don't eat garbage. Don't eat scavenger animals. The law tells us to take care of animals, to take care of our earth. I think it was about 30 years ago or so that I read an article on the new hot viruses that were coming out of our rainforests because of deforestation, and that we would see more and more hot viruses like Ebola making their way into regular society from the forests that we were destroying. Don't be cruel to animals. Don't stack them up in cages in wet markets. Don't eat, like I said, don't eat weird stuff. Take care of the garden. Take care of other people's needs. Don't put your needs, wants, and desires above your neighbors. So your neighbors need to not be sick with COVID outweighs your desire to go to the beach this weekend, or to hang out at whatever rock concert you want to, or hang out with whichever group, including coming to church, you want to. That's the law. Sum up the law, and there are probably, I don't know how many hundreds of rules that could have prevented this type of outbreak. But we don't turn around and ask God for his help until after we've done all the violating of the law and all the principles of the law. And then we turn around and say, well, God, why did you allow this to happen? And he could just as easily, as Jesus said through Abraham in his little parable, you had Moses and the law to tell you all this. You didn't listen. You didn't want it. Now you want me to be in charge of everything. You're going to lay it at my feet after you've stopped listening to me through the law. And so we end up, in a way, kind of throwing the same accusation that was being thrown to him here about Lazarus. That if you had been here, if you had been taking over. And of course, the very strange outcome, if you insist on God being the one who needs to be straightening every last little thing out, is that you're going to create the very type of God that most of you claim you don't want. The one who's completely and utterly able to just exert justice on people and keep everybody under his thumb, and rule as dictator of the entire world. So that's the law. The law comes at us and says, I'm good at organizing your community, but not so good with trust. What about the signs? What about the signs of love? Even this sign of love of raising Lazarus. Well, what did he say? Your brothers will not believe, even if a man came back from the dead. So Jesus raised Lazarus. And yet, in our own grief, we want Jesus to repeat the miracle for us. You let Lazarus live. How come you didn't? I lost a sister. How come you didn't let my sister live? Even if we like Lazarus are cured even unto death, and Lazarus still died. That still happened. I'm sure he got a cold 2 weeks later. I'm sure that the messiness of being human and being in a broken and fallen world didn't change for him after his own resurrection from the dead. And in fact, because he was resurrected from the dead, his life became endangered by the very Jewish authorities that put Jesus in John's gospel to death for raising Lazarus. This happens about a week before his own death. So when you listen to Martha and Mary and those of us who are going through this COVID, in our lament, in our grief about a world that is out of our control and beyond our imagination, the biggest thing that Martha and Mary can imagine to say to Jesus was, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. That was the biggest sign that they could come up with. That's how broken we are. The biggest thing Jesus can imagine is that nothing will separate him from his beloved friend. And in that, he means nothing. Nothing can separate him from Lazarus. Not the mocking questions of the fellow mourners, not the slight accusations of his beloved friends, Martha and Mary, not the government, not fear of the Jewish authorities that he's been told are looking to stone him. Nothing can separate him from Lazarus. His love for Lazarus holds him to Lazarus even through death. Death cannot separate him from Lazarus. That's how big Jesus is thinking. They're thinking, well, maybe you could have kept him from dying, or maybe you could have kept him from getting sick. And he's thinking, maybe I could keep him for eternity. Maybe I could keep him in my love forever. And not only him, but be the life and the resurrection for all of my beloved, for all of my people. So his question shows that we just don't understand the problem. The problem for us is we're trying to figure out how to negotiate this life where we are mostly in control of our own life and our own selves, and God is sort of call on you for help. I'll call on you for the 1 or 2 rough patches that I'm going to have this month. The rest of the time, you go do your God stuff, I'll do my human stuff. And that's the problem. The problem is that our truster got broken. We don't have the ability to have faith in God. We can't get off of ourselves as number one. And God is the Band-Aid and the patch that fixes our broken selves. Whereas Jesus understands that we are broken. I mean, look at what he's done. Whether you go through the law or whether you go through love and signs of love, like healing, we still end up not trusting. We still end up sitting there like his followers here and saying, well, you missed an opportunity here, God, and I'm disappointed in you. I'm disappointed in your lack of faith faithfulness to me. And that's essentially what he has. And so what do? If signs of love from Jesus and the law are not going to ever reconcile us, what do? We're dead. We're stuck in the same tomb that Lazarus is. We can't trust. We can't have faith. We can't manipulate. We can't cajole. We can't beg God into doing things the way we want him to. We can't stop judging him as not doing this world the way we want him to. We're dead in the water. We're actually dead in the ground. And like Lazarus, all we can do is sit there and lie in our death. And the good news is that Jesus wouldn't leave his friend there. That it wasn't in proving his love through acts of glory, but that the glory of God would be shown in his exchanging death with Lazarus, with becoming the resurrection and the life for his good friend. And so he calls him. He reaches down into that death that has a hold of him, and he yanks him back into life. And he does it out of love. I am Lazarus. You are Lazarus. All we can do is wallow around in the death of our lack of faith, our disbelief, our constantly trying to be the leader in this relationship. And thankfully, Jesus loves us enough that he doesn't leave us there, dead in our sin, dead in our tombs, but reaches in and pulls us out, becomes our life, becomes our resurrection. That's the glory of this passage. It's not that he has special miracle powers that is the glory. The glory is that God loves you so much that he sent him to give you God's love, despite your own death, despite your own fears, despite your own anxieties. Where is God in the midst of this crisis that we people have really contributed to in a great way? Where is he? Reaching into the death and the loss and the fear and the anxiety and being resurrection and life. Amen.